Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Tulsa World Opinion video and podcast. Download this video onto a podcast on Apple, Google, Spotify. I think that's it. So anyway, I'm Jenny Graham, editorials editor of the Tulsa World.
I'm Bobby Sett, editorial writer and columnist.
And it's snowy out. So Bob is in the newsroom because he has internet out, which is, so not a fun snow day. And I helped push a car out of the ditch with my son who couldn't quite get out of the driveway. So he stayed home today. So, we're having that kind of day. But, it's interesting. I woke up this morning to my mom calling, which is, always sort of a 50-50 chance of what that's going to be like. I don't know if that's how your reaction to a mom call at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
She goes, Jen, I just got through reading your column and I just want to tell you I love you and I'm worried about you. And I was like, I had to think, first of all, what I wrote. And then I had to think, how did that come off? And then I checked my email and I have a lot of email of people telling me they love me. And so I just want to address to everybody, I'm fine. I have a very thick skin about things. But the column was about the reaction to a column I wrote a couple of weeks ago. And it was just about the demographics of the legislature, looking at the demographics of city councils. And it's a column I've written probably 3 or 4 times before, because every election, every demographics changes. And but this particular one, and that's what I wrote about. And my argument is we should just be purposeful about trying to grow leaders, pay more attention to who we're appointing to boards, that kind of thing. And that was a trigger for some people. And the reaction was very angry, particularly when I pointed out that our legislature in particular is 91% white and almost 80% male. And I just, that's historically been the case, but we can do better. But wow, the anger was pretty swift. And I was encouraged to write that reaction about how people are just, I was accused of, all this stuff, stirring it up, causing problems. And I was encouraged to write that by Randy Crable, who said, it's interesting that what does it say about this time that we can't even bring up the facts, that if people are triggered by just hearing that, then how are we going to get anywhere? And I don't know, it just kind of had me thinking about maybe this is why things like critical race theory is taking off with some people.
Yes.
Or last year's House Bill 1775. I mean, things about race that are what I call fear-based. And I don't know what I don't know what the fear is. I mean, we've talked about this, Bob. Why when I bring that up, what are people scared of? Is the loss of power? Is it?
Yeah.
Just, I don't want to feel bad about things. I don't.
This is a thing I think has been brewing for a little bit, and it's definitely tied to the changing of the demographics of the country and the state. So we've known for a while that the country is becoming much more diverse, racially, ethnically, and things like that. So for the longest time in this country, for almost all of its history, it's folks that look like you and me that have been making the rules. We are the default. Our versions of the events that we have been passed down to us for, a good couple of centuries now. All of that's kind of being challenged as the voices of growing minorities have become louder. And it's not because they're louder because they're being more insistent. It's because you've got the different groups of people that make up a larger part of the country. So this pushback is one of those kinds of things where I thought it's almost like a subconscious thing.
Yeah, it's almost psychological. And I put it out in today's column that people who are not represented, when they look at our state legislature or the city council or whatever board, and they don't see themselves and they don't feel represented, they're not waiting for a columnist to come along and tell them that. That's already there. I think what our pages try to do is to give a is to provide space and to provide avenues for other perspectives, because we do have a political climate in Oklahoma that is super majority Republican. It's very conservative. I mean, almost 70% of people, I think, voted for Trump. And so we get a lot of like single messaging out of that, which is the way it is. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I do think that we have to be purposeful to try to hear another side, to try to hear from people who aren't at that table and who don't have that megaphone. But it was weird is that whole discussion got lost because people were just angry that was pointing it out. And I think we just have to get past that somehow. But
it's kind of become weaponized a little bit.
Exactly. And I think, when, especially with these school board races where everyone's really sort of going after this critical race theory, which no one seems to define. I mean, no one seems to give an example of where that's being used in Oklahoma, but yet that's what everyone wants to talk about in these races. And it's like, you're missing the point of a lot of the issues going on. So, I think we have to kind of try to get past that. But anyway, I just want to take a moment to tell everybody I'm fine. I appreciate the love, but I wasn't writing that to get love. I was just thought the reaction was interesting because it's certainly angrier than the last 4 times I've written that story or column. But it did kind of transition well into my next Sunday column, which is about campaigns. And you've noticed this. I think we've talked about this, where the language of campaigns is all about fighting.
Yes.
Fight Congress. I'm going to fight the libs. I'm going to fight the conservatives. I'm going to fight Nancy Pelosi. And then they'll be shooting guns or riding horses or working out. I mean, that's always my fun one. Like if I ran for office, they'd like show me baking cookies, I guess, or reading a book. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not that active of a person, I guess. See me on the rowing machine.
If someone's going to have a video of them working out to show that they're strong, give me one good quality squat. Just one.
Exactly. Or do we do we take off if like they're on a treadmill but they're not really have good form? I mean, do we, is there some
if you got your treadmill on the incline and you're hanging onto the treadmill?
Yep, you can't be congressman then.
Nope.
You can't serve in office. But it's like this. We have sort of when you think about the law, the job of a lawmaker, it's reading a lot, it's listening, it's talking. I mean, none of the skills, they're not fighting. I mean, they shouldn't be fighting. They are fighting, I guess. But it's just weird. Like, I think we should kind of, and it used to be, and you and I are about the same age, there used to be a campaign approach that was effective, that was, I will work across the aisle. I will go to Congress and I will get something done. And we've replaced the approach of I'm going to get something done and work with those who I disagree with to I'm going to fight them and we're just going to dig in.
Yeah.
And that's that anger. And I don't know how to get past it, but we can't even, I was even thinking now we can't even get them in the same room. Like, remember a few years ago after Hurricane Sandy, where Obama comes to look at the damage and he met with Chris Christie and how everyone flipped out because Chris Christie met the president.
Yes. Yep. That's, if you remember, I think late last year, I wrote something that kind of talked about this a little bit too, and how sometime in the 1990s, when the contract with America was brought up in Congress and Newt Gingrich sort of led the charge for a GOP takeover in the House, eventually all of Congress, it became less about competing and more about fighting. It became a lot more combative. And that's only doubled down year after year after year, because the other side is not your opposition. The other side is your enemy.
Right.
And that definitely, when you're talking about dealing with your enemy, you're not reaching across the aisle to cooperate with your enemy. You're fighting your enemy. And it's all of the imagery of fighting, of, putting on a pair of boxing gloves in a ring, or, shouldering a 12 gauge or an AR-15 and shooting targets or skeet or whatever. I don't know, whatever. All of those things come into play to make you look like a fighter, whatever that is. I have a kind of, it's all a little bit silly to me anyway, because like I said, just give me one good squat, just one.
Well, in transitioning to the next big story for our pages on Sunday, you have written one of the most depressing pieces and scary. Depressing maybe not be the right word. Still scary, and it's just to set it up here, and I'll let you explain it. And I am curious why you decided to write about this. But you basically did a lot of research on what would happen if a nuclear bomb hit Tulsa, and it's very well written. People need to read it, but you'll be a little anxious afterwards, because I read it at like 11 o'clock at night, and I probably shouldn't have done that. But why did you do that? I mean, because we grew up, we're Gen Xers. And by the way, good job getting, what was it that you mentioned?
The day after.
The day after. Gen Xers will get that. So,
yep.
But why did you do that? What led you to wanting to write about that?
Well, not too long after Russians invaded Ukraine, and the Russians started getting a lot of pushback early on, and a lot of promise of we're going to, from the West, that we are going to resist this and help the Ukrainians. Vladimir Putin had hinted at the possibility of, well, if that happens, then maybe I can, consider using my vast nuclear arsenal. Well, this isn't something we've had to contemplate for a while. Since the fall of the Soviet Union, nuclear war really kind of faded into the background, even though the weapons didn't, but the threat of it did in our minds. And as I was kind of going through Twitter and just reading stuff, I was noticing a lot of people from younger generations who were not cognizant of Cold War realities when they were young, or not even born yet. We're like, oh my gosh, what is this? What new hell do we have to face now?
They didn't grow up hearing the stories from even our parents, who were well aware, lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Right. Like yeah. So I went, my memory goes back to a class that I took when I was in college, where we had studied for about a week or so, we'd studied nuclear war, and we spent a day looking at what would happen in our little college town, 35 miles outside of Oklahoma City, in the event of a full-scale nuclear attack. And that one single class was the most memorable session I ever had through college. It has stuck with me. So what I tried to do is research that, what it would look like, what would be a possible scenario, and just kind of figure out how this would go down in a place like this. And in a full-scale attack, yes, there are enough weapons in Russia, strategic nuclear weapons, that a place like Tulsa could be a potential target. We've got stuff here that would be advantageous to not be there anymore if you were an enemy. So trying to look at the types of weapons that would be used, the timing of it, the after effects. And some of it was surprising to me, but none of it was great.
I mean, it was something I haven't pondered in a while, but it's the different types of nuclear weapons that our weapons have gotten so sophisticated.
Yes.
And it's an interesting piece, and I hope everyone reads it. And then I think but we also have, and what was not addressed is that we also have, the cyber attacks that are very real, that we're already sort of experienced on smaller scales. And there's also bio attacks, bioweapons that, and so but reading your nuclear piece was, sobering, to say the least. But
it was sobering to research that thing. That was that was dark.
So next week you're writing about rainbows, where rainbows come from, how happy we are to have them. That's your charge.
Something like that.
But
something nice.
Something nice. But it's hard when we have a politics going on, because our legislature has certainly been active, and for better and worse. Not a lot of talk about the budget yet, but a lot of talk about everything else. One of the editorials that our editorial board came out with this past week, or maybe it was last weekend, was on the Judicial Nominating Commission or Committee that we need to bring up. And it's a Oklahoma, it was interesting when you research the history back in the 60s, we used to vote on our judges to the Supreme Court and appellate courts, and not surprisingly, there was a scandal where they were taking bribes. And also political legislators were putting influence on them. So they were making rulings based on political influence. And so based on that, they kind of blew up that system and came up with this judicial nominating committee. And it's worked well. It's worked. We have been scandal free for over, almost half a century. We've gotten attention for it because it works better than the federal system, where it's basically most of the committee are non-lawyers, but they're appointed from different places, from different congressional districts. They vet candidates for the Supreme Court and appellate court, based on merit. And then they take a list, send it to the governor, and the governor appoints from that list. But the idea is it's free of politics, free of partisanship, and we've had very good judges from that. Well, in this move, and this has been brought up before, the lawmakers are getting frustrated that our court systems are declaring their laws unconstitutional. And so they want to, and they call it legislating from the bench. It's not, it's a separate check on government. And so they want to have more control over who goes on the bench. So this particular one would abolish the committee and commission, sorry, forgot what they call it, and do it just like the federal government, where the governor chooses the nominee just based on anything, and the Senate confirms. And the idea is it puts more power in the hands of the governor and the legislature. And I think it's a horrible idea. And I think our board wholeheartedly agreed, because look at our federal system.
Yeah.
A circus for every Supreme Court nominee. We have federal vacancies because whoever's in power, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, there's a stalemate over partisanship. And then we have judges that just don't get the job because they're the wrong party or something. Yeah. So we want lawmakers to vote that down, that bill, and for people to be aware of it. So it's a bad.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Exactly.
And that's the thing is it was created, like you said, in response to a serious problem that threatened the integrity of the bench, and it fixed it.
It did. And we have a true independent judiciary. And
it has been working for decades. And it's been working well. If you don't like being checked, if you don't like things like checks and balances, maybe the United States of America is not for you, because that is what our whole government system is founded on, is checks and balances.
I think we wrote, and I probably stole it from Wayne Green at some point, the former editorial editor, that the answer is not to do away with the system. It's to write laws that aren't unconstitutional, because
that would be helpful. Yeah, that would be very helpful.
So there's some other, there was another editorial, I think, that's coming out that our board talked about and that you're taking the lead on, which is a Rob Standridge bill that would, I'll let you explain it. It's about the homeless camps that different cities are dealing with. So
Mr. Standridge wrote a bill that does, among other things, requires, and just bear with me because it's going to sound as strange as it is. Okay. It would create a system where homeless camps would have to abide by building codes, municipal building codes, and that the cities would be responsible for monitoring things like wastewater drainage from these camps into water sources. And they would have to do this if they find a problem with any of this. They would have 30 days to eradicate the camp, or basically be responsible for any legal problems that would come up with it. The language of the bill says they'd be liable for any problems. So, not surprisingly, I won't get into what other people said. I'll just get you my take on this, okay?
And I will say that the take is a take that the board has approved of. So this
Yes.
is an editorial board discussion we had. Yeah.
Yes. It's basically trying to outlaw homelessness. That's the bottom line, is what you're trying to do. So you're trying to just push the problem away to where, who knows. You're trying to tell me that people that set up a camp, they have almost no means as it is, and they have to meet the same codes as a
building. So there, we have homeless people who are setting up a tent somewhere, and the idea is they're gonna, it's just sort of a,
they have to meet the same codes as a builder.
It's a way to just legally give a legal reason to go and shoo them away.
You've got folks that their main concern right now is, I'm going to set up my tent or my tarp and I got to find something to eat. That's what they're thinking about. They're not thinking about, well, if I am living here and 5 feet out of the woods, I'm chunking some trash and go relieve myself or whatever. Gosh, I wonder what that's going to do to the water quality. No, they're trying to exist. They're hoping they don't freeze to death or somebody come up on them or something like that. They have no means for this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. You're telling cities that are already dealing with the homeless problem to a high degree, and this is a difficult problem that does need to be solved, but you're telling them to sink more resources into this to not actually help the problem, solve the issues, the root issues of homelessness. You're basically just going to turn this into a law enforcement thing, even more than it already is, which we know is very limited and sometimes punitive effects on people. Or they're going to get in trouble. They're going to be subject to some kind of lawsuit that somebody files, whatever. And I think the term I use for this in the editorial, not to give away too much, is particularly on this building code thing, it's absurd. Mm-hmm. It defines the term absurd.
And the thing that stuck out at me with that story was Rob Sandridge had said he's from Norman. He did not consult anyone from Norman or any of the outreach groups that work with people who are homeless. He basically just created it. And I think, and I haven't researched it, but I think that there was a similar bill like this that was presented to the Austin City Council, may have been in the Texas legislature. So this is not, this is one of those copycat legislation that did not come from people who really are trying to solve this. And Tulsa, I know, because I'm not familiar with Oklahoma City, but we have a pretty robust group that are trying to address this from trying to get rental assistance to keep people from getting evicted and put on the streets, to the mental health issues that lead people, because we've tried the law enforcement and moving them away. That doesn't work. So what else?
This is textbook bad policy making. I'm just going to call it for what it is. I don't mean any ill will or anything like that to lawmakers who are putting together bills like this, but when you just burp out something like this that does nothing to solve the problem and criminalizes behavior of people who are already facing a number of crises of their own, what are we thinking here? What are we trying to accomplish? I do not get that at all. And
well, I want to bring up one more absurd bill that we've not written about yet, because we haven't had time, which is the bill that passed the House that would allow parents to give anonymous donations to their public school teachers for a tax credit. And that is an absurd way to fund education, because first of all it does is make the parents that can just give $1,000 to a teacher, they're already going to be in wealthier places. And so no teacher is going to want to teach at a poor school when you can go to, this other school and get money from anonymous people. And it's just, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And I think that it was John Eccles who said he didn't think parents would use that as a manipulation. And I want to say, bless your heart, because you have not been around enough PTA tiger mamas. Yeah, I've been around some pretty aggressive parents who want their kid in that teacher's classroom or this homeroom or whatever. And when you start, and then those parents are going to be like, I'll give you $1,000. You don't think it'll happen? I guarantee you it'll happen. So, and let's just say you've got a family that they've given you $1,000, but you are going to have to discipline their kid.
Mm-hmm.
There's something psychological there that's like, how do I, there's always that, is there a string attached? It's a horrible bill. It's, I cannot even believe that, and when they asked on the floor, like, well, what will this do to low income schools? They said, oh, well, we'll figure that out. There'll be other avenues we can do that. I'm like,
sure.
This does nothing to improve education. So it's like a session of bad bills so far when it comes to education. And that's probably a whole other podcast, but we got to wait till the session ends.
Yeah.
Then we'll give them a grade. Let's give them a grade after that session. So
I was thinking two thoughts with that suggestion or that law or bill or whatever we got going on. It reminded me back probably about 8 or 9 years ago when we were really facing some education cuts and things like that, and teachers just in a real desperate situation, where I was seeing fundraisers in some of the suburban school districts to raise money for schools. I think one of them was in Jenks, it was to prevent layoffs.
Right.
They were trying to do a fundraiser to prevent their teachers being laid off. And I'm like, what in the world? We are down to this point? Just fund it. Just fund it so they don't have to fire anybody.
Right. And then there are some issues with the IRS too. I mean, I've been involved with these where you have to pay also the salary, the benefits, and it's not the solution.
Well, and the second thing that pops up to me is this looks like one of those workarounds that we saw, like when we passed the I think it was state question 640, can't raise taxes without a vote of the people or X percentage of the legislature, and then start cutting taxes. All of a sudden it's like, well, we started cutting taxes, but we need money to do stuff. So what did we do? We found workarounds like fees and fines and all these other administrative costs that weren't exactly taxes. You couldn't call them taxes, but they had to do these things just to keep things afloat. They're working around things instead of just being responsible, funding the institutions you're responsible for funding, and stop dancing around. Because what you have with this bill is they are dancing around something which they could solve themselves if they just knuckled down and did it.
Right.
What are they thinking?
Well, the voucher bill hasn't come up for a vote yet, so we'll just see how that plays out, because that would take more money away.
Sure.
But anyway, what is there anything national? I'll tell you, there was an interesting piece about, and the headline was great. It was the Brittany Griner. Why aren't sports talking more about her? She's the WNBA player, plays for Phoenix Mercury, I believe it's Mercury, arrested in Moscow. She was playing in Russia in the off season, and she was arrested at the airport for her vape. And the Russian officials claim there was hashish in it. No one really knows. That's the allegation. So she's being detained in Russia, and it brings up a lot of things. I mean, there's always this weird intersection of sports and politics and geopolitics. That the first question is, and it just cracks me up, why is she playing in Russia? Well, let's see. She's a premier player in the WNBA. She's one of the few that can dunk, and her salary for the Phoenix Mercury was like $228,000. So yeah, she's going to be making money in foreign markets where she can earn more. So we start there. But have you read much on this particular case?
I've read some, and that what you're talking about right there, where you have particularly in women's basketball, a lot of these athletes do compete overseas because the money is better. Mm-hmm. So that's not uncommon. When I saw that, it brought to mind something I saw on 60 Minutes. I think it was about 3 weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. It's this exact situation. They were asking the question, who is responsible as a group for more kidnappings and hostage takings than other groups. And you'd think, oh, drug cartels or terrorists or this or that. No, it's governments, foreign governments, or just, national governments across the planet are responsible for more of these ransom or hostage taking situations than any other group. And that's exactly what this is.
Right.
That's exactly what it is.
Well, I'm in the camp of, I don't think she committed a crime. I mean, I'm in the camp of they're holding a star player who's an American for some reason at some point. I mean, it could just be she's literally a pawn in sitting there, and I think they're waiting to use her at a certain point. And it's, it's kind of scary in the way that, athletes end up being shrapnel for these, political tug of wars. And we see it in the Olympics a lot, including this last one, but it comes up all the time. And so
she's the perfect hostage too, because she is fairly high profile. She's American. There's no ignoring this. You can't sweep it under the rug. She's somebody that has been mentioned, thousands of times by ESPN. People have seen her in basketball games at Baylor and in the WNBA. She's like, for the Russians in this case, the perfect person to have here. And I think given where we're at with the Ukraine war and the tensions between Moscow and the West, and particularly the United States,
I know
I'm not very optimistic for
between that and your nuke story. It's enough to like send me under the covers this weekend. So, but we want to end up on a light note, but I just can't think of a light note right now. So what do you think, Bob? How do we end this?
Well, we got one more good snow. So that's kind of cool in its own way, although I think most of us are tired of winter. I find myself looking for things in my own little world that make me happy, that might make other people happy. So one of the things I do on Twitter is I do a daily distraction pick, which for me is like pictures of mountains and stuff like that.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I just post that out there and throw it in there. I think I forgot to do it last night, but anyway.
That's a good one.
Find stuff like that. The thing that broke up my feed, if you remember a while back when we were talking about the Super Bowl, and I put on the Denver Broncos hat, even though the Broncos weren't in it. I'm a Broncos fan through and through, but we've suffered. We have definitely not been feeling much love the last few years. And then they traded for Russell Wilson. Sorry, Kansas City fans. The free ride is over. We finally got a quarterback. It just made me so happy. I don't know. For like a day, I was like, yes. So that's what I got for on the positive side. I can't pull anything out of the war or state politics or national politics or inflation or anything like that. So I'm all let Russ cook. Yes.
Well, I found
Make football fun again.
This before, what makes me happy this past week, I found the 90s or 80s college rock station on like Amazon Prime, and it's all my favorite. And early REM, all that stuff.
That's good stuff. Like college radio.
I had it going, and my husband and I were very happy listening to that. So that might be cranked up today. So
we'll get any Pixies in there?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Smithereen.
Nice.
Smithereen.
Yeah, Smithereen, good stuff.
So yes, so we're showing our ages, but my kids actually like it. So they can't, or they don't complain about it. So I take that as they like it. So.
Pixies are ageless.
Exactly.
Don't care what you say.
Well, until next week, everybody, keep warm, be safe, and we will talk to you then.